Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome everyone to Imperial's One's Belonging series, where we explore the experiences of individuals from different backgrounds and to look at how they have got their sense of identity and belonging. And this week, it's a real pleasure, as I say every week, but this week we've got a real pleasure in that we have Nilay Shah. And Nilay Shah is a professor of process systems engineering at Imperial College. And he's got a fascinating story to tell us. So Nilay, I want to just say another big welcome and thank you for agreeing to be a part of the Belonging series this week. Nilay, I'm going to kick off our little chat this afternoon by asking you to tell me a little bit about where you got your original sense of identity, belonging when you were growing up.
Thank you, and thanks for having me on the program. So I had a quite interesting childhood because I was born in Kenya, and I lived there through my whole school years. My dad is originally from India and my mum was originally from Germany. So it's quite an interesting environment because they were both not born there. My dad moved there when he was a young child and my mum moved there, when they got married. So I ended up with these kind of three different heritages, if you like. In many ways, the easiest one for me was the country of my birth because it was a place that I could immediately just associate with. And it's a place, generally, if you meet people from Kenya, you'll find they're very proud of their country. It's a country we're generally very proud of. I think it's a very interesting country, very sophisticated in many ways. And particularly in the time that I was growing up in the 70s, it was just a place that was very easy to identify with. The president at the time was extremely popular. I mean, in some ways, he was seen as a bit like how South Africans might identify with Nelson Mandela. So it was a kind of easy association and not something that particularly I would have ever thought back and reflect on that troubled me or felt confused me in terms of identity. That was probably the easiest. But the other two identities, I think they were more complicated. Like my actual family background. Particularly because with my mum being German, but actually, of course, she was really the only member of her family in the country. And I had a quite large extended family on my dad's side. So obviously that was my kind of visible family. And so for me and my siblings, I think it probably was quite confusing that we had these two heritages, but no real connection with the other one. Because I only met my maternal grandmother for the first time when I was probably 10, because she lived in Germany, and the rest of our family on that side, they all lived in Germany, and we just hadn't been. Well, that's not actually true. I actually met her when I was 1, but obviously I have no recollection of that. So my first meaningful kind of encounter with her was at 10. So I think growing up on the plus side, I think it was very exciting to sort of have these multiple backgrounds because it sort of got you into cultural experiences and meeting people really, really different. I mean, I remember the first time meeting my German family, and it was quite strange even going to that country. But I mean, I think it does for a child. I think it creates confusion because children, they like simplicity and they like to feel part of a group that is familiar. So, with the Indian family, we always felt, a little bit different in some ways. And we always used to wonder about our mum, we might go to a wedding or something like that, and my mum might be the only white person there. And we always used to think, how is it for, I mean, she seemed quite relaxed and everything, but we always used to wonder, how is it for her? And so I think that's something that is kind of shapes a bit what you're like as a person. So that kind of uncertainty. And the funny thing was, when I went to school, it was a very good school I went to. It was a mission school, with good education, and kind of nice range of people there in terms of ethnic, socioeconomic background and so on. And what was interesting, I made a lot of friends that were also dual heritage or multiple heritage, and actually from quite different types of. And at one point, somebody somehow came up with this nickname or word to describe people of background. He said, confused.
No, I'm looking. My internet is
Because
just going.
It sort of reflected the fact that I think particularly, in the 70s, where I have to say the kind of language people used was quite different. So it was quite normal to be known as half caste, for example, as just a neutral, what was seen as a neutral descriptor in those days.
Yeah.
So that word, it was funny. It was a word that we used to describe ourselves, and it actually makes, when I think back, it actually makes a lot of sense.
Just repeat that word for me. It's just
confused.
Confused.
Yeah.
Yeah. I can
Confused.
understand. Yeah.
It's a much nicer word than any of the other
Yeah.
kind of terminologies. Yeah. Confused. And I think that kind of explains the more difficult bit, because I think the most comfortable people are the ones that are very rooted in their identity. They know their culture very well, and they have a peer group to associate with, and it makes them kind of more comfortable. They know who they are, they know where they fit, and so on. And I think for my siblings and me, it was a bit more complicated. It meant we had a lot of closeness between the three of us. I think that was a good thing. And as a family unit, we had a lot of closeness. We really liked our parents' stories, because our parents were very adventurous. My dad was an orphan, and he came as a child to live with his uncle in Kenya. My mom, she grew up essentially during and after the war in Germany, and at 18 she decided to leave and come to the UK. So despite the history between the countries, she wanted to come and experience life in the UK. And so hearing their stories was really interesting. Actually, my mom has a really interesting story in relation to probably the Belonging series.
Yeah.
But I'll share with you, because she started as an au pair and eventually became an air hostess for an American airline, which was a charter airline. And they used to love, their main route was New York to London.
Right.
And so one of the things people don't know is she got very involved. A lot of those flights were actually for people from Jamaica. So when people talk about Windrush generation, everybody thinks of ships.
Yeah.
But actually quite a few people also came by plane, but you never, for some reason, you never see that imagery.
Yeah.
And she was an air hostess on those flights. So although she only flew New York to London, I think the flights were like Jamaica to New York to London.
Yeah.
And she experienced that, and she found that really fascinating, because she herself had traveled first to the UK and then to the United States. So she was of that same kind of mindset of people moving around and trying out a new life. So that was a positive for us, I think, was our parents' stories and the confidence they had in just trying a new place and making a life. So I think that was probably the very positive bit of our childhood.
So you've spoken about the positive bit. Can we delve into the more negative bits? What which help to kind of like, how that kind of like shaped you in any way?
Yeah, I think the first thing was feeling not quite part of any specific community.
Yeah.
Because you're not exactly like anybody else. So you although you kind of identify with them, you don't feel 100% the same.
Yeah.
And I think until you're about in your 20s, maybe you mind about that sort of, you still stop minding eventually, or mind less. But I think as a child, I think I sort of then would try to sort of probably please people more than necessary,
Yeah.
which I think is maybe a very classical
Yeah.
sign.
Yeah.
And I think also one thing that's probably quite confusing, I think, is when you have these multiple heritages, people don't probably, they still think of you as being one or the other, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So I'm usually assumed to be Asian.
Yeah.
Which is fine. I don't have a problem with it, but it does mean sometimes funny things, like one of the things you suddenly notice when you have a background like mine is a lot of casually negative remarks about Germans, for example, that are considered quite acceptable even in today's society, and of course more so when I was younger. That was quite interesting, because people don't know that's part of your background. So they're happy to talk in certain ways.
Yeah.
And of course, you know, you hear these things and you just feel a bit diminished.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that's a common thread in some of the discussions that you've had with people.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, that's probably the side that takes a long time to work out, you know, what does it mean to come from multiple backgrounds, and who are you?
Mm-hmm.
I think when you start to develop a profession and or you get your, you know, you sort of university education, then you start thinking of yourself in different ways. You're not thinking so much about your racial identity or other things like that. You start thinking of yourself as being, you know, a scientist or an engineer, and that helps.
So for yourself, it sounds to me as though you don't, not that negative aspect or that kind of like that confusion was replaced only after you kind of like adopted or developed a new identity, as not necessarily just thinking of yourself as being Indian and German, as it were. Did you ever think of yourself as Indian, German, or Kenyan, or
all three?
That's what I mean, because you've got that.
All three, and the easiest was the Kenyan bit, because I think that is the country of your birth, and you associate with the place and its culture and the people.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of easy somehow. It's the other two that are kind of more complicated because of the visibility of different family members, and the fact that neither of them are quite like you, because they have their individual identities and cultures, and you're trying to kind of find a way through. My parents from different religions as well, so there's that side of things as well.
Yeah, so there's a lot of factors that as a young child that you're having to process, and then it's when you find when you found your identity. So would you say that when you got your education, that was like a wow moment, or I can be this?
Yeah, definitely, because then you're creating an extra characteristic for yourself. And then, of course, as you become more specialized, you can say, "Oh, I'm an expert in this, I'm an expert in that," and that, you might even, you know, you may be primarily, particularly in a work context, you know, you're just thinking of yourself in that way. But the other thing that happens is that, you know, for me at least, when I suppose started working, particularly, is I'm automatically, I do feel like I'm, you know, one positive, I'm more culturally sensitive, having grown up in these three different cultures. So I there was a point at which I sort of realized, okay, it was probably quite complicated for me growing up. Can't have one specific anchor, but actually as an adult, it's an advantage to have an appreciation that different cultures are different, and they look at things in different ways and experience things in different ways. And I don't need to be told that, I suppose. I think that's one of the big challenges that we have in trying to make an inclusive workplace. Is not that people are inherently good or bad. It's just that they haven't had an opportunity to think about things from a different perspective and realize that saying certain things or doing certain things in a certain way, it can be taken very differently. You know, I was trying to explain to somebody, I won't go into detail, but there was a kind of an online meeting that I wasn't at, but I had to sort of find out about and investigate a bit, because at the beginning of a meeting, before you get in the formal business, sometimes there's a bit of informal conversation, like where you've been, whatever. So there's a bit of banter, and essentially some of the things that people were saying, they didn't realize that within their small group there were other people also on that call to whom it's not appropriate to talk about those sort of things. It's a sort of thing I would sort of intuitively not do. So I think that's one of the things I've learned has been a positive. So despite the fact we had grappled with these things as children, I think my siblings as well, they have that as an advantage as an adult.
So it's kind of like attuned you to the sensitivities of differences.
In fact, exactly. I think as a child we were almost oversensitive to it. If you know what I mean. But then it's sort of eventually, I think it is a good thing.
I can see Linda's got a question. I'll ask it later on. Right. Just in terms of that, because I'm really interested in kind of like that almost transition of identities, from kind of like the personal identity because of your cultural heritage and things like that, to that professional identity, and how the two intersect, and how actually the one has helped you to be kind of like more sensitive or more attuned to promotion of diversity within the workplace. Am I right in saying that?
I think so, because I sort of, well, first of all, that's an area that I have a lot of passion for anyway, because I think it's something that we're far from where we should be in the UK, and in particular in my field of engineering, but I suspect it's the same in other STEM subjects, STEM professions. So I think we have a lot of work to do there. But I also now, having grown up with a range of people in my childhood, and having had friends from quite a wide range of backgrounds, if I think that any of them is not allowed to reach their full potential because of some systemic issues, then it just feels, very wrong. So I think that is something that was very, I suppose, useful for me in growing up. It's just to see, the environment I was in Kenya was quite good, in the sense that people could just develop as they should and achieve what they should. I think that every country has difficulties with socioeconomic status, so people with less access to education or social networks and all that will always struggle a bit, but at least there's no evidence of people being held back for other reasons. And so I think sort of thinking around how organizations can be more attuned to the fact that they should be open for everyone, and most importantly, the systems that we have, also even the visuals and all of those things, shouldn't make people feel, oh yeah, this doesn't look like me, or I don't feel like this, because I did occasionally have those feelings. We had the converse effect when we went to go and see my mom's family. So my mom, she came from kind of a small town, which is actually next to one of the big cities in Germany, but it's quite a small town. So when we used to go there to visit our relatives, who all lived in that town, so we were the only non-white people in that whole town. So in our first visits there, I mean, my siblings and I, my dad, we felt quite strange again from a very different perspective, because we were really very sort of visible, let's say. And so again, I guess, as a kid, first of all, I think as a kid, you sort of feel people are, looking at you and thinking about you in a way that they're probably not. Most people have their own preoccupations. And couldn't care less about you. But I think it's a self-consciousness sort of thing, isn't it? And I remember my mum being asked, "Oh, where did you adopt these beautiful children?" And she had to, because our dad wasn't with us on that day, so she had to explain, no, their dad is Indian. These are biological children.
Yeah.
And funny things like that, they sort of stick with you. So I always feel that you don't want accidentally, in any workplace, whether to create reminders for people that the system isn't perfect, and that it's very easy to make people feel alienated or diminished. And I think so. Yeah, from a personal experience, I suppose I do try to reflect on those things in my department and in the college.
Can I ask you, what was it? Sorry, what gave you the passion to do sciences? Yeah.
My mum was saying to me that they used to call me Prof when I was about 3 or 4 years old. The nickname. So I think it must have been something that was really very early on, because I certainly remember being interested in and reading things, about magnets and electricity and things. So I was quite a geek probably as a kid in many ways, although I liked sports as well.
Yeah.
So I guess it was just inherent. It wasn't like, oh, should I do this or should I do that? It somehow, from a young age, it was always what I was gonna do, or obviously the specifics obviously weren't clear. I remember, in school, when we finished primary school, they do that thing of saying for each classmate, what do we think they're going to do? Yeah. And my classmates wrote about me, oh, he's going to end up at NASA, because in the 70s, NASA was a big thing. So he's most likely to end up at NASA. So it was obviously something about me that was inherent, I think.
Yeah. So science was kind of like, I'm not going to say in your genes, but you really appreciated and had a passion for.
And there was no real family background in that. I mean, neither of my parents were particularly scientific or anything. So I don't really know where that came from.
So I'm gonna ask about kind of like that transition, because from the point of view of you growing up in Kenya, did you, and you visited, I'm assuming that visited India and also Germany. When you came to the UK, I believe you came as a student, all right? What made you pick the UK as a destination?
I think first of all that it's sort of the colonial connection with Kenya. So obviously I grew up with English as my kind of main language and my education language. Yeah. And there was a kind of a natural connection. And so I probably wouldn't have, and I wanted to do engineering. Mm-hmm. There wasn't really much thought of really going anywhere else. Mm-hmm. I think, but more to the point, I wanted to come to London. I thought, okay, so it's going to be a really exciting place to be a young person. Yeah. But B, actually, because of London being a kind of cosmopolitan and diverse place, so I felt I would be, fitting in well. Mm-hmm. I probably wouldn't have wanted to go necessarily to some small town, coming from abroad. Yeah. But I'd visited London 1 or 2 times for holiday, and I could sort of see that it was, very international, and you would just be able to sort of blend in, no problem, sort of thing. And obviously, as I say, quite a fun place to be a student. So that's what kind of led me to Imperial, because I wanted to do engineering, I wanted to be in London, so I guess that was the obvious choice.
Okay, so when you did get to Imperial, did you feel that that sense of belonging, that sense of identity when you arrived at Imperial, or did that develop over time? I'm not going to say how many.
I'd say it took a while to develop over time. I think at that time Imperial wasn't as international as it is now. Right. And so in a way, it took me a while to sort of understand other people from the UK, and there were a few other people from other parts of the world. So I'm a kind of person, if I think back to sort of school days and those early universities, I sort of like quietly observe people a bit. I think that's my wife laughs at me sometimes because I act in certain ways, and she says, "Why do you do that?" And I say, "Oh, it's my immigrant mentality. It's something that will never go away." So, when you're a new person, a new place, you kind of sort of step back a bit and watch, and you sort of keep your head down a bit. I think that's a classical thing. So I think it took me a while to sort of get to know how things work and sort of understand the culture and so on. But on the other hand, from the point of view of the identity of the discipline and the work, then there's a sort of very common thing, and that I enjoyed very much. That in engineering, you do a lot of group work and project work, so they rotate you out with different people, and is a good way to sort of get to know different people and see how they think, and you realize, okay, the way we go about things, we have a lot in common. So we may come from different places, but one of the nice things I think about the STEM subjects is that people very quickly forget about where you come from, whatever. It's more like, what can you do?
What can you contribute?
What can you contribute?
Yeah. So in terms of your professional career, have you always felt that you've fitted in? Did you always want to be an academic, as it were, or did you have aspirations to do other things? How did you come about going into kind of like staying at Imperial, as it were?
Yeah, I mean, I had a bit of time out working at Shell, but other than that, I've been at Imperial, and I've done some work with startup companies as well, which has given me a chance to experience life on the outside. But I think probably I always wanted to be an academic, but to do a relatively applied subject, which would give me a chance to do projects in industry and projects with companies and so on. And I think within that, yes, there's probably maybe, sometimes a bit of caution. So not thinking, oh, I'll go and try something else. Because again, I think that's something that comes with, if you come somewhere from outside and you still, in the back of your mind, might feel less secure. You may not think, oh, okay, I'm done with this. I'm going to go and try something completely different, to go to another country, go to a different university, different. So yeah, I think maybe there's an element of playing safe a bit sometimes that comes into my decision making. But maybe that's just might just be my personality, but it might be to do with some of the things that we've discussed as well.
Yeah.
But I've been very happy with my career at Imperial. I think the nice thing about academia is once you get some traction, the way you're thought of is based on your contributions, your publications, your students that you've graduated, the project that you've done. You can, you can build a career that's assessed quite objectively. So I hope that, people feel that generally in academia we assess objectively. I think there's still, you can still see the data don't actually fully validate that, because when you look at grants, success rates, publication rejections, career progression, you see differences in the data between men and women and people from minority backgrounds. So we're not quite there yet. But the principles are there in the sense that you ought to be able to assess people very fairly. I think what is harder to do, and it's important that we do it, is we think about people's backgrounds and think about, have they potentially had to face more challenges to get to where they are today, whether those were earlier or later in their career. And therefore, we may not look at them, or we ought not to look at them in the same way. We ought to take them around them and see what other things have they been doing. Have people been doing outreach and engagement and other things, rather than those very narrow things that we measure. But it's something at least I feel quite proud of now. If I reflect back, is my academic career.
Just kind of like two follow-up questions. one of them is throughout your kind of like childhood and adulthood, as it were, did you have any mentors or anyone who's helped to, that you felt has helped to propel you or to provide that kind of guidance that you may have needed to get from one stage to the next stage in your career or progression?
Kind of not, no individual person, but there's sort of a few people here and there. My PhD supervisors, I think they were, very good in terms of not scientific stuff, but how they went about their careers and how they went about thinking about the field and how you conduct yourself as a person. I think they were really insightful because they had time for everybody, and they demonstrated, I think, for me, you can be academically successful without being a bully, but actually to be very thoughtful and compassionate people. So I think, yeah, those two in particular. And then there were, I guess, many of you may have come across someone called Bill Wakeham. He was deputy rector at Imperial, but he was a head of department who hired me, and he was, I think, extremely straight talking. I mean, I don't know if everybody, but he extremely fair as well, and he would always have time. I mean, he worked extremely long hours as a result, but he would always have time to deal with any issue as quickly as he could deal with it.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I think that's very important, that you don't let things fester. You try to deal with things as quickly as possible. But I wouldn't say I had a specific person to guide me on the more complex issues. These were more around conduct and style of working. I learned a lot from these people. But some of these other issues that you've raised, and in fact, this is probably one of the first times for me to talk about these things. So it's not so easy for me to talk about them. No particular person, but I think going back to what we discussed at the beginning, my parents, I think, were always a good inspiration because they, were quite happy to move countries and just do things in a way that was quite adventurous.
Yeah. So breaking new grounds, finding out new things as they were going along. That's brilliant.
Yeah.
I'm going to open up the questions because I've seen that we've got two questions, one from Linda and also one from Sunday. So Linda, if you wanted to ask your question first, and then Nilay will have a chance to address that, and then I'll come back in with a couple more. Linda, are you okay to ask your question? So know that you were...
Yes, actually I've read it now.
All right.
Yeah. That's a good question. It's a very funny question, isn't it? Where are you from? And I'll answer it first by saying I was talking to somebody from Australia, and I think she was born in India and she studied at Imperial, but she's lived in Australia for a long time. And somebody asked her, where are you from? And she said Australia. And they said, oh, but where are you really from? So how do I answer that question? Yeah, I have to give a bit of an essay, usually is how I answer that question. So I have to give a bit of an explanation for that. So I sort of explain, I've lived in the UK for now like 30 something years, but I was born in Kenya, and talk about my parents' background. So what do I think about that? This is another thing when I talk about kids and how we feel self-conscious. This is one of my dad's favorite questions because he's genuinely interested in people and where they're from. So wherever we go, he will ask somebody where they're from. Like if we go out for lunch, he will ask the waiter, waitress, after they've taken, they will, oh, where are you from? And the three of us were sort of for a whole life, sort of cringing. But actually, usually people are quite proud. The funny thing is, he's only asking out of curiosity. And people are actually, most of the time, people are really proud to say where they're from. And so they don't mind. So what do I think about that? I used to mind, but actually, as time has passed, I sort of feel maybe people are asking it now in a different way from how they used to ask about it, because I think because people are more aware that everybody might have quite different lived experiences, I sort of feel it's potentially quite a nice question to ask. And sometimes I'm quite curious new people.
Hello?
A bit about their background. But it's a very, very good question, because it's one that can be taken in many different ways. I'll ask somebody where you're from, and they'll say something like Beckham, and it sort of kills the conversation, because that obviously wasn't the answer that somebody wanted.
I understand.
So yeah, thanks, Linda.
Thanks, Linda, for that question. Sunday, can you
Yes.
ask? Hi,
Hi,
Sunday.
Sunday. Yeah,
Hi,
long time. Haven't seen you for
I
ages.
know,
How are
I
you?
know. That's blame COVID for that.
Yeah, that's the problem. Yeah,
We normally come across the corridor somewhere between
exactly. I
canteen
know.
and
It's
let
a
people
shame.
know that. Anyway,
Yeah.
thank you very much for coming along today to share
Yeah.
your stories with us. It's amazing. I would never knew you from Kenya. I always knew a combination of two different countries, but definitely not Kenya.
Exactly. Yeah.
So,
So obviously you know Washington very well. So it's very
oh
nice
yes,
that we first
I was
met.
just gonna
Yeah.
say that yourself, Washington, and now China.
Yeah.
I think you guys are making a good past experience with us. But my question, I think you've touched it. Okay, how have you used that to your advantage, if any, to basically move yourself up to step on those ladder to where you are now at Imperial
Yeah.
College?
So I think probably the most important thing that it's helped me with is understanding people, and what their motivations are, where they come from, and how they think. Because obviously how people might react to something or how they might think about something is obviously shaped a lot by their cultural background, their history, the family background, and so on. But I think it's given me a really nice appreciation for the contribution that different people can make, in the sense that whenever you're thinking about problem solving or dealing with a complex issue, what I can reflect on from my background is the fact that you can probably come to a much better result and a much better outcome if you have a range of people that are helping you. So one of the things I like to do, I'm no longer head of department, which I can tell you I'm quite pleased about. But one of the things I always like to do as a head of department when we were thinking about some difficult thing was to consult with a range of people and get a range of views. And that's not just in terms of their ethnic background or gender, but also career stage, because I think one of the things that really surprised me was that the younger staff members, how they think about things and careers, and so it's quite different in some ways, and how they might tackle a problem is quite different. So I think the fact that taking different views can really get you to a better answer, but also an answer that's fairer for everybody. I think one of the things we've seen this with technology, and we've seen this with systems that we have. If you don't account for your community, you'll create things that are discriminatory. So You may not have intended it to be that way,
Mhm.
but that's what the result will be. So I think that's probably the most useful thing that I kind of can take from my background.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks for that question, Sunday. Really interesting answers there in terms of the fact that, excuse me, that idea about hearing from multiple voices as opposed to just being confined to your own way of thinking, helps to develop a product which will be much more, I don't want to say user friendly, but much more relatable and efficient for other people. And as a process systems engineer, that's what you would kind of like be focused on, making an efficient process, I would have thought. Am I right in that?
Yep, that's my core discipline. That's
Yeah.
Trying to make systems more efficient and more robust and safer. And you're right. I mean, we've seen quite a lot of surprisingly bad new technologies where people haven't thought through simple things. You might say it's basic common sense, but actually shows you that you are not thinking about your community in a fair way. One of the things I always say about engineering, it may sound arrogant to put engineering so high up. I always say engineering, it's a really important part of society. So we should think about engineers a bit like how we think about the police or medics. They're a really important part of society, so they should reflect the society that they're part of. So that engineering profession, in terms of its makeup, should look like the society in which it sits. And that's just because I think it's such important to society. But one of the reasons for that is then the solutions will also be appropriate for the society.
Definitely. I see another question has just popped in from Consolata.
Oh, hi, Consolata. Yes. How are you?
Would you like to ask the question?
Yeah, we haven't met, but Paul told me about you, and Onesimus as well, because he told me he's collected together a small community of people from our background. So
I didn't know that. Hello, nice to meet you.
He mentioned your name. Yeah, nice to meet you. Biggest learning as head of department. Wow. Did anything surprise me? You know what surprised me? It surprised me that before I became head of department, I didn't fully understand how things worked in the deep central bit of the college, like how decisions, how big decisions are taken. And the second thing that surprised me was, I suppose, the fact that you can sort of do your own thing in your own bit of the college, wherever you are, and not fully understand how everything works. And I think sometimes what we do when we're running things is we take a lot of things for granted. And I feel that I sort of wanted to spend a lot of time to explain to people more, how things worked and how decisions are made, and because I felt like, I suppose, we all just focus on our one bit. But actually, I'm not sure how successful I was in that, because I think most people are quite happy for things just to go on and just to do their bit. So I suppose initially I got a bit frustrated because I think I wanted to try to make too many changes, and you realize actually in a complex organization is very finite what you can do. So actually what I ended up doing was spending a lot more time not trying to change a lot of system stuff, but actually to get people to think more about their values and their conduct and their behavior and their appreciation for each other. Because one of the things I realized is you don't have to invest money, you don't have to change anything physical, you're just making people think a bit about how they engage with each other in the workplace. And I'm quite happy with how that went. So maybe the biggest lesson is really, instead of trying to change systems and procedures, think more about the human side of things. And actually, we did a lot of early work on values in our department, and that did actually feed in to the project that the college is doing on values. Because Melanie Lee, who many of you probably know, she saw what we were doing, and she adapted that and helped the college to develop a process to establish its values. So yeah, focus more on people, I think, is the sort of summary, rather than on all of the systems and procedure stuff.
Thank you.
Thanks. That I really like that, Nilay, about the focusing on the people. The systems actually will change when you've got the right people in place, and more people, I feel, will be attracted to an environment where they feel that they can gain that sense of belonging, which it sounds to me that you did whilst you were head of department. I'm going to ask just one final question, just because of time, and that would be, normally I ask the question of what advice would you give to your 16-year-old self, right? But I want to just ask one other question before that, which is, what would you say has been your biggest achievement?
Wow. I think maybe becoming a fellow of the Royal Academy of Engineering, because that's a way of saying you're amongst the best engineers in the country. And I suppose it was not something I ever sort of aimed to do, and it's something that it's your peer group are recognizing you for that, but they're looking at you at that question of, what have you contributed? Have you contributed something to the profession and added value to the profession? And the reason I'm saying that is I'm now chairing the committee which decides who is elected into the academy. So I've seen how difficult the process is, and it makes me wonder. I mean, in academia, we all occasionally experience this imposter syndrome, and I look at this process, I think, how on earth did they elect me when this thing is so complicated? So yes, it definitely feels like a good achievement.
Fantastic. I love that. I love that. And I'm going to just finish it off with that final question in terms of what advice would you give to, I'm not 16-year-old younger self. What advice would you have said?
What would I have done differently? I would have probably told myself to be a bit less cautious. I was quite cautious in that period of my life, 16 to 25 sort of time, maybe, and be a bit more adventurous. Yeah, that's probably what I would have told myself.
It's interesting that you say that, for the simple reason that when you speak about your mum and dad, you talk about the adventurous side within your mum and dad. And yet here you're saying the thing that you wish to, the advice you might give is be a bit more adventurous. So it's kind of like a paradox.
It is. Yeah, I can't explain that. But, even they used to laugh at me sometimes as being quite cautious. I suppose that's what I would probably tell myself.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nilay, it's been absolutely wonderful hearing your experiences, and I want to just say another big thank you for agreeing and for being a guest on Belonging this afternoon.
Great. Thank you very much. Yeah, it's been a pleasure for me too.
That's brilliant. We're going to just advertise what's happening next, and if you want to stay on, if anyone wants to ask some questions off camera, then we can. So I'd just like to let everyone know that for next week, we're going to have Hayley, who is a research associate at Imperial College, and she's going to be giving us some of her insights in her department and how she's gained her sense of identity and belonging. If you have missed any of the previous recordings, please go to our YouTube channel, where you'll see, which is tinyurl.com/belonging-IAO, where you can catch up on some of the other videos and interviews that we have done. And what I'd like to do is to say another big thank you, and please join us again next week for another episode of Belonging.